Rome did not fall in a single night. Before the flames, before the screams, before the lies, Rome was already burning from within. This was the most powerful city on earth. It ruled lands from Britain to Egypt. Gold flowed in. Slaves filled the streets. And fear lived quietly in every corner. To understand the fire, you must first understand the city it consumed. Rome in the 1st century was crowded beyond control. More than 1 million people lived inside its walls. Most were poor. Most lived stacked on top of each other in tall wooden buildings. These buildings were cheap. They were fast to build. And they were deadly. Narrow streets twisted like traps. Sunlight barely reached the ground. Air barely moved. A single spark could become an inferno. Fire was not rare in Rome. Small fires broke out almost every week. People were used to them. They feared them, but they lived with them. This comfort with danger would cost them everything. Above the common people stood the rich. They lived on hills in stone houses, far from the slums. They had space. They had guards. They had power. And above them all stood one man, Nero. Nero became emperor at a young age. He did not rise through war or blood. Power was handed to him. First, people loved him. He lowered taxes. He gave games and shows. He spoke like a man of the people. But Rome was not easy to rule. Behind the smiles, the Senate watched him closely. Old families despised him. They believed power belonged to them, not to a young ruler with strange ideas. Nero loved art. He loved music. He loved performance. To Rome's elite, this was weakness. An emperor was meant to conquer, not sing. To rule, not entertain. Whispers began early. They spread slowly like smoke before a fire. As Nero grew older, his rule grew darker. Enemies disappeared. Punishments grew harsher. Trust faded. Rome was calm on the surface, but underneath it was tense and unstable. The poor were angry. Food prices were high. Jobs were scarce. Life was hard. The rich were nervous. They feared new taxes. They feared losing land. They feared Nero's power. The Senate felt trapped. They had lost control. Their words no longer ruled Rome. This tension filled the city. Now look at Rome itself. Markets overflowed with goods. Oil, wine, cloth, wood, all perfect fuel. At night, candles burned everywhere. Torches lit the streets. Kitchens stayed hot long after sunset. Safety laws existed, but no one enforced them. Bribes solved problems. Rules were ignored. Rome grew faster than control. And then there was the people no one trusted. Foreigners, slaves, new religions. Among them were Christians. They were few in number. They met in secret. They refused Roman gods. This made people afraid. Fear does not need truth. It only needs a target. Christians stayed quiet. They avoided public rituals. They spoke of one God. To Romans, this looked dangerous. The city was divided. Rich against poor. Old power against new power. Tradition against change. And above it all, the emperor struggled to hold balance. Nero wanted to reshape Rome. He dreamed of wider streets, better buildings, a safer city. But change in Rome always meant resistance. Every reform created enemies. Every decision was watched. Every mistake was remembered. As the summer of the year 64 arrived, Rome was dry and hot. The air was heavy. The city was restless. No one knew what was coming. No one imagined how fast everything would fall apart. Rome was standing on the edge. A city full of wood, full of oil, full of anger. All it needed was a spark. And when that spark came, Rome would never be the same again. Rome looked eternal. Strong walls, endless crowds, unmatched power. But beneath the noise and glory, something was already breaking. This city ruled the world, yet it could not control itself. Every street held tension. Every home held fear. Every night carried risk. Long before the fire, Rome was a city on the edge. More than 1 million people lived here. Most were poor. They lived high above the ground in wooden buildings that swayed with every step. Families stacked on families. Rooms packed with lives and hopes. These buildings burned easily. Everyone knew it. Everyone ignored it. The streets were narrow, so narrow that carts scraped the walls, so tight that crowds could not escape quickly. Air barely moved between the buildings. In summer, heat stayed trapped. In winter, smoke filled the air. Rome breathed danger every day. Fire was common. Small fires started in shops and homes all the time. Oil lamps fell. Cooking fires spread. People woke to smoke and ran with buckets. Most fires were stopped. Some were not. The people had learned to live with this risk. They had no choice. Above them lived the wealthy. They owned land. They owned slaves. They owned influence. Their homes were made of stone. They stood apart from the chaos. They watched the city, but they did not feel it. Rome was divided by class, not by walls. And then there was power. At the center of everything stood the emperor. His word was law. His mood shaped lives. Nero ruled Rome. He was young when power came to him. Too young for many. Too different for most. First, Nero was welcomed. He spoke gently. He listened. He reduced taxes. He gave the people games and food. Rome smiled. But the Senate did not. They were old families. They believed power belonged to them. They saw Nero as a mistake. Nero loved music. He loved art. He loved the stage. To the elite, this was shameful. An emperor was meant to command armies, not applause. Whispers began early. They said Nero was weak. They said he was careless. They said Rome was unsafe under him. As time passed, Nero changed. Power hardened him. Fear followed him. Plots were discovered. Enemies were punished. Some were forced to die. Each execution solved one problem and created another. Trust faded. The people still enjoyed games and shows, but they watched carefully. The Senate obeyed, but resentment grew. Rome stayed quiet, but it was not calm. Food was another wound. Grain fed the city. Without it, Rome would starve. Prices rose. Supplies failed. The poor felt pressure every day. Hunger creates anger. Anger searches for blame. Rome was full of outsiders. Slaves from distant lands. Traders with strange accents. New beliefs that challenged old gods. Among them were Christians. They were few. They met in secret. They refused Roman gods and rituals. To many Romans, this felt dangerous. A city protected by many gods feared those who rejected them. Suspicion grew quietly. Fear always grows quietly. Now look again at the city itself. Markets were packed with goods. Oil for lamps. Cloth for trade. Wood for building. Everything needed for fire was everywhere. Torches burned at night. Candles lit homes. Bakeries stayed hot after sunset. Fire laws existed, but enforcement was weak. Bribes erased problems. Warnings were ignored. Rome expanded too fast. Control fell behind. Nero saw this. He talked about rebuilding. Wider streets. Stronger materials. A safer Rome. But change threatened the rich. Land would be taken. Homes would be removed. Power would shift. Every plan created enemies. As summer approached, the city dried out. The heat pressed down. The air felt heavy. People were tired. Nerves were thin. Rome was full of wood. Full of oil. Full of fear. Politics were tense. Class hatred was real. Trust in leadership was weak. The city did not know it yet, but it was waiting. Waiting for a moment. Waiting for a spark. And when that spark finally came, it would not only burn buildings. It would burn truth. It would burn loyalty. It would burn Rome's belief in itself. Because before the fire touched the streets, Rome was already burning inside. If this story changed how you see history, stay with us. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and press the bell icon so you never miss the truths that history tried to hide.